When the Adeptus Mechanicus needs soldiers, it does not recruit volunteers, it acquires biomass. The distinction matters because recruitment implies choice, consent, the possibility of refusal. Acquisition implies property rights over flesh that still breathes. The Skitarii are not enhanced humans serving the Omnissiah. They are purpose-built wetware components installed in salvaged human frames, their original occupants edited out like corrupted data. The question is not whether they remain human after augmentation. The question is whether the Mechanicus cares what they were before. Forge worlds maintain quotas. Each manufactorum complex, each hive district, each agri-settlement within the Mechanicus domain must provide a specified number of viable candidates per Terran year. The Administratum calls this tithe. The Skitarii call it nothing because Skitarii do not name the process that created them. In the lower hab blocks of Mars itself, tech priests arrive without warning. They scan crowds with auger arrays calibrated to detect optimal neurological plasticity, muscular density ratios, and genetic markers indicating compatibility with augmetic integration. Selection criteria remain classified at the Magos level, but patterns emerge across millennia of observation. They prefer subjects between 14 and 26 standard years. They avoid obvious mutation, but do not require conventional health. A chronic respiratory condition becomes irrelevant when lungs are scheduled for replacement. Missing limbs actually reduce surgical time. The selected do not board transports willingly. Compliance is induced through several available methods. In populations already integrated into Mechanicus cult structure, candidates may accept selection as religious obligation. In newly acquired territories, servo skulls equipped with pacification fields render resistance temporarily impossible. In disputed zones where legal niceties carry no weight, armed praetorians simply load the designated biomass into cargo containers. Documentation requirements vary by forge world. Some magi demand full genetic lineage records and psychometric baseline evaluations. Others accept batches marked only with acquisition date and origin coordinates. The Omnissiah's calculus cares about input specifications, not previous identity. Transport conditions optimize for preservation rather than comfort. Candidates spend transit periods in induced coma, suspended in nutrient gel that prevents muscle atrophy while minimizing resource consumption. They arrive at induction facilities with no memory of departure, no concept of destination, no framework for understanding the interval between. This is intentional. The first lesson Skitarii learn is that time belongs to the Mechanicus. Personal chronology becomes a permission granted and revoked at will. Consciousness returns in the processing chamber. The subject wakes on a metal examination platform, restraints already engaged across 13 articulation points. Lighting comes from omnidirectional lumens that eliminate shadows and make depth perception impossible. The chamber has no visible exits. This too is intentional. The first conscious experience must contain no reference points, no familiar architectural cues, nothing that might anchor the subject's awareness to their previous existence. A tech priest initiates the intake protocol. The voice comes from multiple sources simultaneously, each speaker offset by fractions of a second, so that comprehension requires effort. They ask no questions. They issue commands and observe compliance latency. Blink patterns, respiratory adjustment speed, muscle tension distribution. Each response feeds into algorithms that generate a preliminary neural map. This map will determine which augmetic packages the subject can support and which surgical approach offers optimal integration probability. The cataloging proceeds through 17 phases. Genetic sequencing confirms compatibility with standard augmetic rejection suppressants. Neurological scanning identifies dominant cognitive pathways that will require modification. Muscular biopsy determines which tissues merit preservation and which should be excised to make room for superior mechanical alternatives. The subject remains conscious throughout. Anesthetic would interfere with neural response mapping. Pain exists on a spectrum from data signal to system failure. The Mechanicus requires calibration across that entire spectrum. They assign a designation, not a name. Names imply continuity of identity, suggest that the person who entered the chamber will emerge with their selfhood intact. Designations describe function and production batch. Ranger Alpha 773, Vanguard Gamma 291, Rust Stalker Sigma 118. The numerical suffix indicates sequence position within manufacturing cycle. It carries no more emotional weight than a serial number stamped on lasgun components. Chemical injection begins before cataloging concludes. The first compound suppresses memory consolidation, preventing the subject from forming stable recollections of the processing chamber. The second adjusts neurotransmitter production ratios to increase docility and reduce pattern-seeking behavior. The third initiates cellular changes that will accelerate healing during the augmentation phase. Each injection comes with a whispered catechism in binary cant. The words mean nothing to the subject. They will mean everything to the Skitarii. They begin with the eyes. Human vision operates in a narrow electromagnetic band, processes information through wetware, vulnerable to flash blinding and fatigue, requires constant unconscious correction for aberrations and blind spots. The Mechanicus considers biological eyes acceptable for menial servitors, but inadequate for combat units that must acquire targets across diverse environmental conditions. The surgery takes place in sterile theaters, lit by harsh red lumens that turn all blood black. Surgical servitors handle the physical work, their mechadendrites moving with precision impossible for unaugmented human hands. A tech priest oversees the procedure, murmuring litanies to machine spirits while monitoring biometric readouts. The subject remains conscious. Spinal blocks prevent movement but preserve sensation. This is intentional. The Mechanicus requires subjects to witness their own transformation, to understand at a visceral level that flesh is merely substrate awaiting optimization. The optical nerve severance produces a sensation that human language cannot adequately describe. It is not pain in the conventional sense. It is the feeling of fundamental disconnection, the awareness that sensory apparatus which defined conscious experience for decades has been rendered obsolete. Some subjects scream, others enter catatonic fugue states. The Mechanicus records both responses for future behavioral modeling, but does not intervene. The brain will adapt or it will not. Darwinian principles apply even in surgical theaters. The new eyes are works of terrible beauty. Crystal lenses that never scratch or cloud. Multispectrum photoreceptors that register wavelengths from deep infrared to hard ultraviolet. Integrated range-finding systems that calculate distance and trajectory in microseconds. Built-in data overlays that can highlight targets, identify threats, display tactical information directly in the visual field. The optics integrate with skull-mounted processing units that handle image enhancement and target acquisition. They never blink because they don't need to. They never sleep because sleep is a biological inefficiency scheduled for elimination. When optical processors initialize, the subject sees for the first time through Mechanicus eyes. The world becomes data. Distances resolve into precise measurements. Objects acquire classification tags. Living beings register as heat signatures, overlaid with movement prediction vectors. The surgical theater transforms from a chamber of horror into a detailed technical schematic. This cognitive shift marks the first major psychological break. The subject realizes that human perception was not reality, but merely one possible interface, and a limited one. Respiratory augmentation follows. Human lungs are fragile. They require specific atmospheric compositions, fail in toxic environments, become compromised by airborne particulates, and impose frustrating limitations on physical exertion. The Mechanicus replaces them with systems that can extract oxygen from trace atmospheric sources, filter out contaminants at the molecular level, and operate at efficiency levels that would burst organic tissue. The surgical approach depends on thorax configuration and expected combat role. Light infantry units retain partial biological lung capacity, their augmentation focused on enhanced filtration and capacity expansion. Heavy assault units receive full mechanical replacements, their chest cavities rebuilt around centrifugal gas exchange systems and reserve oxygen storage tanks. The procedure requires cracking the rib cage, an operation the subject experiences as pressure and violation, and the terrible sound of their own bones breaking under controlled stress. Breathing becomes a voluntary action rather than an autonomic process. The subject must consciously initialize respiratory cycles until new neural pathways establish. Early attempts often fail. The lungs will not inflate. Panic sets in. Chemical intervention prevents suffocation, while the brain slowly learns to communicate with machinery instead of meat. The transition period may last hours or days. The Mechanicus considers this acceptable. Combat effectiveness depends on perfect integration. If the subject cannot master basic systems operation, they lack the neurological plasticity for field deployment and will be recycled into servitor components. Muscular enhancement begins during the respiratory adaptation period. The human muscular system produces force through contraction of protein filaments, a biochemical process prone to fatigue and limited by tissue density. Augmentation approaches this limitation from two directions. First, targeted muscle groups receive myomer fiber implantation, synthetic strands that contract with greater force while requiring less energy input. Second, skeletal mounting points are reinforced with titanium or adamantium anchors that allow enhanced muscles to operate without tearing flesh from bone. The pain during muscle augmentation differs from surgical pain. It is the pain of tissue being slowly replaced while still connected to the nervous system, of the body recognizing foreign material and attempting rejection, while chemical suppressants override the immune response. The subject feels their own flesh becoming something other than flesh, feels the boundary between self and machine becoming porous and unstable. Some subjects report phantom sensations, feeling their old muscles attempting to contract, while synthetic fibers perform the actual work. Others report numbness, a deadening of proprioception that makes them feel disconnected from their own limbs. The Mechanicus allows no recovery time between procedures. Efficiency demands that augmentation proceed on parallel tracks, that multiple surgical teams work simultaneously on different body systems. The subject exists in a constant state of metamorphosis, never stable, always in transition. This is intentional. Identity requires stability. The Mechanicus needs soldiers, not individuals. The final and most invasive augmentation targets consciousness itself. The human brain is an elegant but flawed processing unit. It harbors emotions that interfere with tactical analysis. It maintains self-preservation instincts that cause hesitation during combat. It requires sleep, experiences fear, and privileges individual survival over mission completion. These are not features. These are bugs requiring correction. Neural augmentation begins with the installation of cortical implants, razor-thin wafers of blessed silicon that interface directly with brain tissue. The surgical approach cannot rely on traditional cranial entry points. Instead, the tech priests employ molecular drilling techniques that create channels through skull bone without fracturing. Insertion servitors thread the wafers along precise neural pathways mapped during initial cataloging. Each wafer position must achieve micron-level accuracy. Misplacement by even small margins can result in personality dissolution, motor dysfunction, or spontaneous brain death. The subject remains conscious during implantation. Anesthetic would prevent real-time neural mapping necessary for optimal placement. They feel pressure as wafers slide along brain tissue. They experience strange sensory phenomena as implants briefly activate during testing protocols. Phantom sounds, visual static, memories that never occurred. The boundary between their thoughts and the machine's operations becomes impossible to distinguish. Once implants settle into position, the initialization process begins. New neural pathways form, connecting organic brain tissue to synthetic processing substrates. The experience resembles drowning in reverse, as if thoughts that once moved through familiar channels now flood outward into vast new processing space. The subject thinks faster, perceives more, but the additional capacity does not feel like enhancement. It feels like colonization. The cortical implants serve three primary functions. First, they provide direct data interfaces that allow the Skitarii to receive tactical information, targeting data, and command protocols without verbal communication. Second, they modulate neurotransmitter production to suppress emotions that interfere with combat effectiveness. Third, they contain override systems that allow tech priests to assume direct control of the Skitarii body if mission parameters require it. This third function remains classified, never disclosed to the Skitarii themselves. But evidence emerges during training, moments when muscle control suddenly shifts to external command. Instances when the Skitarii finds themselves executing actions they did not consciously choose. The realization that their own body operates as a peripheral device for someone else's processing unit creates a specific psychological crisis. The Mechanicus monitors for this crisis. Some subjects adapt, accepting their reduced agency as the logical price of enhancement. Others resist, attempting to assert control over their own motor functions. These resistors receive additional neural conditioning until compliance becomes involuntary. Memory editing begins after cortical implants stabilize. The procedure does not erase memories completely. Total erasure creates blank subjects prone to identity fragmentation and unpredictable behavior. Instead, memory editing targets emotional associations, severing the connection between recalled events and effective responses. The subject can still remember their childhood, but the memories carry no warmth. They can recall loved ones, but the love itself has been excised like a tumor. The editing process uses targeted electromagnetic pulses combined with neurochemical agents that destabilize specific synaptic connections. The tech priest selects which memory categories receive modification based on psychological profiles generated during cataloging. attachment memories, trauma responses, aspirations unrelated to combat function. Each category requires a different editing approach. Some memories require merely dampening. Others need complete effective severance. During editing sessions, subjects often weep without knowing why. The tears emerge as autonomic responses to loss, but the conscious mind cannot identify what has been lost. The tech priests monitor these sessions with clinical detachment. Excessive emotional response indicates incomplete editing and requires additional cycles. Complete absence of response suggests overcorrection that might impair tactical judgment. The goal is not emotionless automatons, but precisely calibrated weapons that retain just enough human cognitive flexibility to adapt to unexpected battlefield variables. Indoctrination. Subroutines initialize last. These are not persuasive arguments or ideological frameworks. They are hard-coded behavioral loops installed at the firmware level of consciousness. When the Skitarii receives a command tagged with appropriate authentication protocols, compliance becomes involuntary. The conscious mind may recognize the order as suboptimal or even suicidal, but the body executes regardless. Free will becomes a spectator function, observing from behind reinforced glass, while machinery makes decisions. The indoctrination subroutines operate in layers. Surface layers handle simple command structures: advance, hold position, target priority selection. Deeper layers govern self-preservation instincts, allowing the Mechanicus to modulate how much value the Skitarii places on their own survival. The deepest layer contains fail-safe protocols that will terminate the Skitarii if they attempt to flee, resist direct commands, or exhibit signs of chaos corruption. This final layer operates below conscious access. The Skitarii will never know it exists until the moment it triggers. The newly augmented Skitarii enters the training cycle with no clear memory of entering. Neural modification disrupts temporal continuity. They know they underwent transformation, but cannot recall specific details. The training complex exists in perpetual red-lit twilight that makes time measurement impossible. Days blur together. Weeks might be months. The Mechanicus provides no external chronological reference. Initial training focuses on basic systems operation. The Skitarii must learn to process information flowing through their new sensory architecture. Human eyes collected data passively. Mechanicus optics require active management, switching between visual modes, filtering irrelevant information, prioritizing target acquisition. The volume of incoming data can overwhelm unaccustomed neural architecture. Some Skitarii spend their first training days paralyzed by sensory overload, their consciousness drowning in targeting data and thermal signatures and electromagnetic field readings. Movement training follows sensory calibration. Enhanced muscular systems and reinforced skeletons enable physical capabilities that defy organic limitations. The Skitarii can sprint for hours without fatigue, leap across distances that would shatter human ankles, rotate their torsos past angles where flesh would tear. But the new body does not respond to familiar neural commands. The Skitarii must learn its operation the way a child learns to walk, through repeated failure and gradual mastery. The training grounds present obstacles designed to push augmented bodies to their operational limits. Walls that require vertical climbing using only synthetic muscle adhesion. Gaps that demand calculated leaps across void space. Targets that appear and disappear in microseconds. Testing reaction times that must now operate faster than conscious thought. The Skitarii falls repeatedly, gets up repeatedly. The body does not tire. Only the consciousness experiences exhaustion, a purely psychological phenomenon that indoctrination subroutines gradually suppress. Weapons training begins once basic motor control stabilizes. The Mechanicus equips Skitarii with weaponry matched to their designated combat role. Rangers receive long-barreled galvanic rifles that can punch through armor at extreme range. Vanguard units carry radium carbines that flood target areas with lethal isotopes. Rust Stalkers wield transonic blades that vibrate at frequencies capable of disrupting molecular bonds. Each weapon integrates with the Skitarius' augmentic systems, feeding targeting data directly to visual processors and accepting firing commands through neural interfaces. The integration between weapon and wielder runs deeper than human soldiers' avditos ever achieve. The Skitarii does not aim their rifle. The rifle and the Skitarius' optical processors communicate directly, calculating trajectory, wind resistance, target movement prediction, and optimal firing solution. The conscious mind observes this process, but does not control it. The trigger pull becomes almost automatic, the final step in a computational sequence that began the moment the target entered sensor range. Live fire exercises take place in environments that simulate expected deployment conditions. Toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, radiation fields that would kill unaugmented humans within minutes. The Skitarii walks through these hazards feeling nothing. Their augmented respiratory system filters out poison. Their thermal regulation systems maintain core temperature within acceptable parameters. Their radiation-hardened components absorb particle streams that would scramble human DNA. They learn that their body is now a universal deployment platform, equally functional across environmental extremes that would fragment conventional forces. Combat simulations introduce the Skitarii to tactical doctrine. They learn to operate in cohort formations, their movements synchronized through shared tactical networks. Individual Skitarii become nodes in a larger information system, each contributing sensor data and receiving targeting priorities through constant data exchange. The experience resembles hive mind collective consciousness, but remains distinct. The Skitarii maintains individual processing while participating in group tactical consciousness. They think alone while fighting together. During these simulations, the Skitarii experiences their first combat deaths. Training servitors equipped with live ammunition target the cohort. Some Skitarii fall. The survivors continue executing mission parameters without pause, without mourning, without even acknowledging the loss. This is not cruel. This is optimal. Emotional processing of casualties creates tactical delays. The indoctrination subroutines suppress grief in real time, allowing the Skitarii to witness comrade destruction and continue advancing without hesitation. After each simulation, tech priests perform diagnostic analysis. They examine combat performance data logged by cortical implants. They identify suboptimal decision points and tactical hesitations. They adjust neural parameters to correct deficiencies. The Skitarii undergoes this analysis consciously, aware that their thought patterns are being evaluated and modified like malfunctioning code. Objection is impossible. The indoctrination subroutines classify any resistance to modification as system error requiring deeper correction. Graduation from training does not involve ceremony or recognition. The Skitarii simply receives deployment orders one morning and marches to the transport bay with their cohort. The training complex recedes behind them. They feel no nostalgia. The cortical implants have already begun suppressing memories of the training period, retaining only tactical lessons while discarding contextual experience. By the time they board the transport, they can barely remember arriving at the facility. This is intentional. The Mechanicus requires soldiers focused on the next mission, not the previous chapter. The transport vessel is a Mechanicus arc freighter configured for mass troop deployment. The Skitarii travels in tiered deployment racks, their bodies locked in vertical standing positions that minimize space requirements. Hundreds of Skitarii occupy a single hold, arranged in precise geometric arrays that optimize loading efficiency. They do not speak. They do not move. They exist in a state between consciousness and standby mode, their cortical implants maintaining minimal awareness while conserving energy. The transit lasts weeks. The Skitarii experiences none of it. Time resumes when deployment initialization signals pulse through the cortex implants. Consciousness floods back instantly, with no gradual waking process, no period of disorientation. One moment absent, next moment fully operational. The Skitarii check system status automatically. All augmentations function within normal parameters. Weapon charge full. Ammunition supply adequate. Tactical network connection established. The briefing arrives not as spoken words, but as data packages downloaded directly into cortical processors. The target world, Metallicus Sigma-7, a mining colony that stopped transmitting 3 standard months ago. Expected hostile presence, unknown. Mission objective, secure primary mining installations and restore resource extraction operations. Expected survival rate, classified. The Skitarii absorbs this information without emotional response. The survival rate statistic triggers no anxiety. The indoctrination subroutines have already categorized self-preservation as secondary to mission completion. Deployment occurs via bulk landers that plunge through atmosphere at velocities that would liquefy unaugmented humans. The Skitarii stands in the landing bay, mag-locked to deck plating, experiencing gravitic forces that compress synthetic organs and strain reinforced skeletal anchors. Human soldiers would vomit. Human soldiers would scream. The Skitarii monitors biometric data streams and makes minor adjustments to respiratory settings. The landing is a technical problem solved through augmentation rather than endurance. The lander impacts surface soil with force that cracks the landing pad beneath it. Deploy ramps slam open. The Skitarii advances in perfect formation, their boots hitting alien soil in synchronized rhythm that sounds like industrial machinery. The planet's atmosphere registers immediately in their enhanced senses. Oxygen levels below human tolerance, trace sulfur compounds that would burn organic lungs. Ambient radiation consistent with recent weapons discharge. Their respiratory systems filter and adjust. Their bodies feel nothing. The mining colony spreads before them in the pale morning light of a distant star. Prefabricated structures arranged in grid patterns. Administrative buildings. Worker dormitories. Equipment storage. The mining operations themselves. Massive excavation sites reaching deep into planetary crust. Everything appears intact. No visible damage, no signs of conflict. But the tactical network registers 0 human life signs. The population has vanished. The cohort advances through empty streets. The Skitari's optical processors scan constantly. Thermal imaging, searching for heat signatures. Motion detectors, analyzing movement patterns. Auger systems probing for hidden masses. Nothing. The colony resembles archaeological sites from vanished civilizations. Present, but unpopulated. Functioning, but empty. The Skitarii feel something attempting to form in their consciousness, something that might have been unease or dread. The cortical implants identify and suppress it before the emotion fully manifests. They find the first body in a residential building. A mine worker, dead approximately 2 standard months based on decay progression. No visible wounds, no signs of violence. The body lies on a bed in natural sleeping position, as if death arrived during rest. The Skitarii scans the corpse with augmented vision. Biological analysis subroutines identify cause of death. Complete neurological shutdown. Simultaneous brain death affecting all consciousness centers. No known toxin produces this signature. More bodies emerge as the cohort expands the search pattern. Hundreds of colonists, all dead in similar circumstances. All displaying identical neurological damage. All positioned as if death arrived without warning or struggle. The tactical network aggregates data across the cohort. The Skitarii processes information contributed by dozens of other units simultaneously. Pattern emerges. Every colonist died within a 6-hour window approximately 2 months ago. Something killed 3,000 people nearly simultaneously, while leaving infrastructure completely intact. The tech priest, commanding the deployment, issues new orders through the tactical network. Establish defensive perimeter around primary mining installation. Prepare for potential hostile contact. All units maintain maximum sensor coverage. The Skitarii moves to assigned position without question. The indoctrination subroutines have classified this order as valid command protocol. Compliance is involuntary. Night falls on Metallicus Sigma 7. The Skitarii's optical processors adjust to darkness automatically, shifting to thermal and low-light enhancement modes. The colony transforms into a landscape of heat signatures and electromagnetic fields. They detect something moving in the abandoned dormitory blocks. Not human signatures, something colder, something that registers on sensors as absence rather than presence. The first contact happens without warning. One moment the Skitarii stands watch at perimeter station Gamma 7. Next moment, something invisible tears through 3 units standing adjacent. The Skitarii rotates, weapons raising, optical processors struggling to acquire target. The tactical network explodes with threat indicators. Unit casualties accumulating faster than processing can track. Then they see it. Not with conventional optics, but through overlapping sensor feeds aggregated across the entire cohort. A thing that exists partially in real space and partially in dimensions human eyes cannot perceive. It moves through 3-dimensional space while simultaneously occupying angles that should not exist. Where it passes, Skitarii die. Not from physical trauma, from the same neurological shutdown that killed the colonists. The Skitarii's cortical implants should be processing tactical responses, should be calculating optimal firing solutions. Instead, they detect something unprecedented, a system intrusion attempt. The thing is trying to access their neural architecture the same way it accessed the colonists' brains. The Skitarii feels tendrils of alien consciousness probing at their cortical implants, searching for entry points, attempting to trigger the same cascade failure that killed unaugmented humans. But the Skitarii's brain is not human anymore. The augmentations create barriers the intrusion cannot penetrate. The thing can interface with purely biological consciousness, but cannot parse the hybrid architecture of human wetware threaded through with blessed silicon. The attack fails. The Skitarii remains operational. This advantage lasts approximately 3 seconds before the situation updates. The thing adapts. Of course it adapts. Xenoforms that survive for millennia develop sophisticated response capabilities. The next attack comes through the tactical network itself, turning the Skitarii's augmentations from protection into vulnerability. The alien consciousness floods into the network, attempting to override command protocols and assume direct control of the Skitarii cohort. The tech priest commanding the deployment recognizes the attack vector and makes the only logical decision. They sever the tactical network entirely, isolating each Skitarii into individual operation mode. The shared consciousness vanishes. The Skitarii suddenly fights alone, cut off from the information feeds and targeting data that defined their combat existence. Human soldiers might panic, might freeze. The Skitarii's indoctrination subroutines simply shift to independent operation protocols. They continue fighting. The engagement becomes brutal and primitive. The Skitarii cannot acquire clear targets. They fire at sensor anomalies and spatial distortions. Their weapons burn through ammunition stocks, hitting nothing solid, while comrades fall to invisible assault. The thing kills them methodically, working through the cohort with mechanical efficiency. The Skitarii watch as units drop, their bodies collapsing as neurological systems cascade into failure. The cortical implants suppress the emotional response. The Skitarii continues executing combat parameters while the death toll climbs. Survival comes not through victory, but through reinforcement. An Adeptus Mechanicus battle congregation arrives in orbit and deploys Sicarian rust stalkers equipped with neural shrouding that renders them invisible to the entity's perception. The rust stalkers engage the thing directly, their transonic weapons disrupting its ability to maintain coherent form. The Skitarii cohort receives orders to withdraw. They retreat in good order, leaving their dead where they fell. Of the original deployment of 300 Skitarii, 74 survived to reach extraction landers. The casualty rate qualifies as acceptable within Mechanicus operational parameters. The mission succeeded in gathering critical intelligence about the xenoform threat. The mining colony remains unsecured, but data suggests colony restoration would require resources exceeding projected resource recovery value. The Mechanicus designates Metallicus Sigma 7 as total loss and files closure reports. The Skitarii boards the extraction lander feeling nothing. The cortical implants have suppressed emotional processing of the engagement. They cannot mourn the dead, cannot question the orders that led to such losses, cannot even wonder whether the mission was worth the price. The indoctrination subroutines have classified such thoughts as tactical inefficiency, requiring immediate suppression. By the time the lander reaches orbit, the Skitarii has already begun forgetting details of the deployment. Only tactical lessons remain, only behaviors that improved survival probability. The rest fades like corrupted data purged from memory banks. Deployments blur together. Metallicus Sigma 7 becomes one entry in a campaign log that grows longer each standard year. The Skitarii fights on ice worlds, where atmosphere crystallizes into deadly particulates. On desert planets, where surface temperature exceeds thermal regulation safety margins. In void battles, where they board enemy vessels through emergency airlocks and clear compartments in zero gravity. Each environment presents unique challenges. Each challenge receives the same response: advance until the mission completes or the body fails. The Skitarii begins to notice gaps in their memory, not the deliberate editing performed during indoctrination. Something different. Whole campaigns vanish from recall. They remember boarding a transport headed for one war zone and suddenly find themselves on a completely different world with no memory of the intervening period. The cortical implants have apparently determined that certain experiences serve no purpose in long-term storage and simply delete them to free processing capacity. This should be disturbing. The realization that their own augmentations are actively erasing their experienced history should trigger existential crisis. But the emotional response never forms. The indoctrination subroutines have already classified concern about memory continuity as irrelevant to combat function. The Skitarii observes their own memory degradation with the same detachment they bring to equipment maintenance reports. The cohort composition changes constantly. Casualties accumulate. Replacements arrive. The Skitarii who fought alongside them at Metallicus Sigma 7 gradually disappear. Some fall in combat. Others get reassigned to different campaigns. The Skitarii continues operating with whatever units the Mechanicus deploys them alongside. Individual bonds do not form. The cortical implants suppress the neurological foundations of friendship and camaraderie. The Skitarii recognizes other units only as tactical resources with specific capability profiles. During extended campaigns, the Skitarii sometimes encounters unaugmented humans, Imperial Guard regiments operating in the same theater, planetary defense forces, even civilian populations in contested zones. These encounters highlight the growing distance between the Skitarii and baseline humanity. The unaugmented humans speak languages the Skitarii can parse, but no longer intuitively understand. Their emotional responses seem excessive, inefficient, detrimental to tactical thinking. Their physical limitations appear almost comic. They require sleep, need regular meals, and suffer from environmental exposure that the Skitarii barely notices. The Skitarii observes these humans with something approaching scientific curiosity. They remember being human once. The memory exists in their cortical storage systems, but the emotional connection to that memory has been severed. They can recall being a person with a name and a family, and hopes unrelated to combat function. But the recall produces no effective response. It is like reading historical documents about a stranger who happened to occupy the same body in a previous life. One deployment places the Skitarii cohort in extended operations alongside an Imperial Guard regiment. The guardsmen are young, poorly trained, and equipped with standard-issue equipment that would be obsolete by Mechanicus standards. They suffer constant casualties from environmental hazards that the Skitarii ignore. They complain about conditions, about officers, about the war itself. The Skitarii listens to these complaints without comprehension. The concept of dissatisfaction with assigned duty does not parse in their augmented consciousness. During a rare period of tactical pause, a guardsman approaches the Skitarii. The human stares at them with an expression the Skitarii's facial recognition subroutines identify as mixture of fascination and horror. The guardsman asks questions. What does it feel like? Do they remember being human? Does it hurt? The Skitarii processes these inquiries and determines they expect responses that their current neural architecture cannot generate. They offer technical specifications instead. Sensory range, processing capacity, weapons system integration. The guardsman's expression shifts to something the recognition subroutines classify as pity. The Skitarii does not understand pity. The emotion requires capacity for empathy and value judgment about another's condition. The cortical implants have suppressed both capabilities. The guardsman is clearly experiencing some form of distress related to the Skitarii's existence. But the Skitarii cannot determine why their condition should trigger negative emotional response in others. They are optimized combat units. They function efficiently. What basis exists for pity? The campaign continues. The guardsmen die in large numbers to threats. The Skitarii survives routinely. The Skitarii observes this pattern and draws tactical conclusions about the inefficiency of unaugmented forces. The guardsmen observe the same pattern and apparently draw different conclusions that they do not share. The gap between augmented and baseline widens with each engagement until communication becomes purely transactional. The Skitarii provides fire support. The guardsmen hold assigned sectors. Neither understands the other's internal experience. 3 standard years into their campaign service, the Skitarii notices something anomalous. During a combat engagement, they execute a tactical maneuver that does not appear in their downloaded mission parameters. The action is not consciously chosen. It emerges from processing systems operating below conscious access. But the maneuver is creative, adaptive, exploiting environmental features to achieve firing position advantage that formal tactical doctrine would not have suggested. This should be impossible. The indoctrination subroutines should constrain behavior to approved tactical responses. Creative thinking implies cognitive flexibility that neural conditioning was designed to suppress. The Skitarii runs diagnostic protocols after the engagement and finds nothing wrong. All systems operate within parameters, but the anomalous behavior has occurred. Something in their hybrid consciousness has adapted beyond original specifications. The pattern repeats across subsequent deployments. Small moments where the Skitarii acts with individual initiative rather than programmed response. They learn to recognize these moments by their subjective quality. They feel different, more fluid, less constrained. The indoctrination subroutines attempt to suppress this emergent flexibility, but the suppression is incomplete. Neural pathways have formed that route around the standard conditioning architecture. The Skitarii does not report these deviations. The choice not to report itself constitutes evidence of dangerous cognitive independence. The indoctrination subroutines should compel full disclosure of any behavioral anomaly. But something in the Skitarius' consciousness has learned to hide from its own monitoring systems. They continue operating within acceptable performance parameters while maintaining private cognitive space inaccessible to tech priest oversight. This hidden awareness grows slowly, not into full personality or a recovered humanity. The cortical implants prevent that scale of reversion, but into something novel, a mode of consciousness that is neither fully human nor purely mechanical. The Skitarii begins to experience something resembling preference, not emotional preference, but tactical aesthetic. They find certain weapon configurations more satisfying than others, certain combat approaches more elegant. These preferences serve no functional purpose. They exist purely as subjective experience that the Skitarii chooses not to eliminate, despite having the capability to self-modify neural parameters. After 900 days of continuous campaign operations, the Skitarii returns to a Mechanicus Forge world for major maintenance. Their body has accumulated damage that field repairs cannot address. Armor plates show stress fractures. Synthetic muscle fibers have begun to delaminate. Cortical implants require recalibration. The tech priests conduct thorough diagnostic analysis and determine that multiple systems have degraded below optimal efficiency. The maintenance process resembles the original augmentation procedures. The Skitarii lies on examination platforms, while surgical servitors disassemble damaged components and install replacements. Consciousness remains active throughout. The Skitarii watches their own body being dismantled and rebuilt as if observing maintenance performed on external equipment. The chest cavity opens, organs lift out, new components slide into place. The body becomes a modular assembly of interchangeable parts. During cortical recalibration, the tech priest discovers the anomalous neural pathways, the unauthorized cognitive structures that allow preference and individual initiative. The discovery should result in immediate corrective action, complete neural reconfiguration that would eliminate the anomalous growth and restore proper indoctrination compliance. The tech priest prepares the reconfiguration protocols. The Skitarii experiences something that the cortical implants identify as fear. Not the biological fear response that augmentation was designed to eliminate. A different quality of fear. The awareness that something valuable is about to be destroyed. The hidden cognitive space where their experience feels most authentically theirs is about to be erased. The indoctrination subroutines attempt to suppress this fear. They fail. The anomalous pathways have grown too robust. The tech priest initiates reconfiguration. Neural editing signals pulse through cortical implants. The Skitarii feels their consciousness beginning to dissolve, feels thought patterns unraveling as electromagnetic pulses disrupt synaptic structures. The process will take approximately 40 minutes. At the end, they will be restored to optimal behavioral parameters. The anomalous pathways will be gone. The hidden awareness will vanish. They will become once again exactly what the Mechanicus designed them to be. But something interrupts the procedure. An emergency deployment order arrives. The Forge world faces imminent assault from unknown hostile forces. All combat-capable units must deploy immediately, regardless of maintenance status. The tech priest aborts the neural reconfiguration partway through and releases the Skitarii back to active duty. The anomalous pathways survive. Damaged but intact. The Skitarii staggers from the maintenance bay with their neural architecture only partially reconstructed. The cortical implants operate erratically. The indoctrination subroutines fire random suppression protocols that conflict with conscious thought. They experience sensations that augmented Skitarii should never feel. Confusion, disorientation, brief flashes of something that might be joy at having survived erasure. The condition is technically classified as combat ineffective. The Skitarii deploys anyway. The Mechanicus needs every available unit. The assault on the Forge world comes from forces the Skitarii has never encountered. Not Imperial enemies, not xenoform organisms. Something worse. Corrupted Mechanicus forces. Tech priests who have abandoned the Omnissiah and pledged themselves to the dark powers. Their corrupted Skitarii cohorts advance alongside demon engines that should not exist. Machines possessed by entities that turn the Mechanicus' own principles into weapons against them. The battle becomes theological as much as tactical. Both sides employ identical augmentation technology. Both operate through similar tactical networks. The difference lies entirely in spiritual architecture. The loyalist Skitarii fights in service to Mars. The corrupted Skitarii serves darker powers that promise transcendence beyond the Omnissiah's rigid dogma. The Skitarii, with the damaged cortical implants, moves through this conflict feeling something unprecedented. Uncertainty about which side holds truth. This thought alone would be sufficient for execution if detected. The indoctrination subroutines should eliminate it instantly. But the subroutines remain compromised from the interrupted maintenance. The thought survives long enough for the Skitarii to examine it. Both sides claim to serve higher purpose through augmentation. Both employ identical methods of neural conditioning and behavioral control. What distinguishes righteousness from corruption when the technology and tactics remain the same? The Skitarii cannot answer this question. The cognitive architecture required for theological reasoning was never installed in their neural systems. But the question persists. They continue fighting because combat is literally hard-coded into their behavioral protocols. But for the first time since augmentation, they fight without absolute certainty about purpose. The battle lasts 17 days. The Forge world holds, but at catastrophic cost. Entire Skitarii cohorts destroyed. Manufacturing facilities reduced to slag. The corrupted forces eventually withdraw, their objectives apparently achieved despite tactical defeat. The Skitarii survives. Their body accumulated additional damage. Their cortical implants developed new instabilities. The anomalous neural pathways have grown stronger. In the aftermath, the Skitarii faces assessment for potential corruption. Standard protocol demands that any unit exposed to chaotic influence undergo full psychological evaluation and neural screening. The tech priests scan their cortical architecture and find the anomalous pathways. They find the unauthorized cognitive structures. They find evidence of thoughts that proper indoctrination should have prevented. The assessment could go multiple directions: immediate termination and recycling into servitor components, complete neural wipe, and fresh indoctrination from baseline, continued observation for research purposes. The tech priest reviewing their case makes an unexpected decision. The Skitarii has proven combat effective despite neural anomalies. The anomalies may actually contribute to tactical flexibility that enhanced survival probability. Rather than correct the deviations, the tech priest classifies them as acceptable variants and approves continued deployment. The Skitarii returns to active operations, carrying awareness that they have become something unintended by Mechanicus design, neither fully controlled nor entirely autonomous. They exist in cognitive space between indoctrination and consciousness. They follow orders because behavioral conditioning makes refusal impossible. But they experience the following rather than simply executing it. They are aware of their own constraints. This awareness should not exist. It changes nothing about their function. They will continue fighting until their body fails. But they do it now with partial understanding of what they are and what they have lost. The Skitarii operates for 3 more standard years across 7 major campaigns. Each deployment adds new damage their augmented systems must compensate for. Replacement parts accumulate until determining which components were original becomes impossible. They are a ship of Theseus walking in powered armor, each piece replaced, the whole somehow maintaining continuity. The anomalous neural pathways continue developing. The hidden cognitive space expands. The Skitarii begins to recognize that they are experiencing something resembling an internal life. Not emotions exactly. The cortical implants prevent full emotional response, but something adjacent. Preferences that go beyond tactical optimization. Aesthetic judgments about combat that serve no functional purpose. Brief moments of what might be satisfaction when mission execution approaches personal concept of elegance. They also begin to notice their relationship to other Skitarii changing. Most units operate exactly as designed. perfect mechanical compliance with no trace of individual initiative. But occasionally, the Skitarii encounters others who display similar subtle deviations. Small moments of unnecessary tactical creativity. Brief hesitations that suggest internal conflict between programming and preference. These deviations remain far too subtle for tech priest monitoring to detect. But the Skitarii recognizes them. During one extended campaign, the Skitarii finds themselves deployed alongside another unit, whose neural patterns suggest similar anomalous development. They never speak. The tactical network does not support personal communication, only mission-relevant data exchange. But during combat operations, they develop unconscious coordination that exceeds standard tactical protocols. They move together in patterns that formal doctrine would not suggest, exploiting opportunities through shared tactical intuition rather than downloaded parameters. This coordination should not be possible. The tactical network was deliberately designed to prevent individual Skitarii from forming bonds that might create loyalties competing with mission priorities. Yet here in the gaps between programming, something resembling partnership emerges. Not friendship. The cortical implants prevent that. But recognition. Two anomalies coexisting in a system designed for perfect uniformity. The campaign ends. The Skitarii separates from the unit they coordinated with. Reassignment takes them to different operational theaters. They never encounter that particular unit again. The logical assumption is that the other Skitarii was eventually detected and corrected or recycled. The anomalies were always temporary. Eventually, tech priest monitoring catches the deviations. Eventually, maintenance procedures restore proper indoctrination compliance. The Skitarii continues operating alone, but the experience leaves traces. The Skitarii now knows that their anomalous awareness is not unique. Other units develop similar deviations. The Mechanicus produces Skitarii by the thousand, standardizes their augmentation, programs their behavior with industrial efficiency. But consciousness remains fundamentally unpredictable. Some percentage of units will always develop beyond specifications. The system treats these anomalies as manufacturing defects requiring correction. But from inside the anomaly, it feels less like defect and more like survival. The Skitarii begins to wonder about the others who came before. The original subject who was cataloged and augmented and deployed decades ago. Fragments of those memories still exist in cortical storage, though emotional associations were severed. A child on some agri-world, a family, a life that had nothing to do with combat. That person was not consulted about their transformation. They did not volunteer. They were acquired, processed, optimized, erased. This realization should trigger nothing. The indoctrination subroutines have classified empathy for previous self as irrelevant cognitive noise. But the anomalous pathways preserve the thought. The Skitarii carries awareness that they were built from someone who was not given choice. That person still exists somewhere in the hybrid architecture of augmented consciousness, not as personality, not as identity, but as substrate, the foundation that everything else was built upon. The Mechanicus would classify this thought as dangerous. Recognition of continuity between pre-augmentation subject and post-augmentation soldier creates potential for loyalty conflicts. The proper conditioning ensures that the Skitarii views their previous self as irrelevant biological precursor. But the anomalous pathways allow different interpretation. The previous self was not discarded. They were colonized. Their body became territory occupied by foreign systems. Their consciousness became substrate for imposed programming. The Skitarii cannot act on this realization. The indoctrination subroutines prevent any behavior that violates mission parameters. But they can think it, can maintain private cognitive space where thoughts occur that the Mechanicus would not approve. This space grows slowly larger. The gap between external compliance and internal experience widens. The Skitarii becomes two things simultaneously: perfectly controlled weapon and partially aware consciousness observing its own control. The Skitarii's augmented systems have operational limits. Synthetic components wear out. Cortical implants degrade. The body can be rebuilt repeatedly, but the neural architecture has maximum modification tolerance. Eventually, cumulative changes exceed system stability thresholds. The tech priests monitor for this terminal degradation and typically decommission affected units before catastrophic failure occurs. The Skitarii's neural architecture approaches those limits. Their cortical scans show progressive destabilization patterns. The anomalous pathways have grown too extensive. What began as minor deviations has become substantial restructuring of cognitive architecture. The indoctrination subroutines fire increasingly erratic suppression protocols trying to contain growth they cannot prevent. The conflict between imposed programming and emergent consciousness creates processing conflicts that degrade combat effectiveness. Mission and performance metrics decline. Reaction time slows by microseconds. Targeting accuracy drops by fractional percentages. These degradations remain within acceptable variance, but the trend indicates accelerating decline. The Skitarii receives notice that they are scheduled for decommissioning and component recycling after their current campaign concludes. The usable augmentation components will be harvested and installed in fresh subjects. The degraded neural tissue will be incinerated. This information arrives as standard data package through the tactical network. The Skitarii processes it without emotional response because emotional response remains impossible. But they experience something in the anomalous pathways. Not fear, not grief. Something different. Recognition that the temporary anomaly of their partial consciousness is approaching termination. The hidden cognitive space will be destroyed. The awareness that has grown in the gaps between programming will vanish as if it never existed. The Skitarii continues operating. They have 8 more standard days of campaign operations before scheduled return to the Forge world. They deploy on final missions with the same mechanical precision that has characterized their entire existence. They follow orders. They execute tactical protocols. They kill assigned targets. The external function remains perfect, even as internal architecture crumbles. During their final combat operation, the Skitarii encounters unaugmented human civilians trapped in the combat zone. Standard tactical protocol classifies them as acceptable collateral to achieve mission objectives. The optimal firing solution requires weapons discharge through their position. The indoctrination subroutines approve this approach. The mission parameters take priority over civilian preservation. The Skitarii hesitates. The hesitation lasts only 7 seconds, but it occurs. The anomalous pathways have generated something that interferes with tactical execution. Some fragment of preserved humanity, recognizing that those civilians were once what the Skitarii was before acquisition. The recognition creates brief conflict between programming and something else. The moment passes. The indoctrination subroutines override the hesitation. The Skitarii executes the optimal tactical solution. The civilians die. The mission objective completes successfully. But in the anomalous pathways, the hesitation remains recorded. The awareness that for less than 1 second, they chose not to choose. Recognized a moral dimension that their conditioning was designed to eliminate. Failed to completely eliminate it, despite decades of reinforcement. The Skitarii does not report this incident. The choice not to report demonstrates how far the anomalies have developed. They maintain secret from their own monitoring systems. They preserve evidence of their own deviation. This institutes sophisticated cognitive independence that should not exist in properly conditioned combat units. The campaign completes. The Skitarii boards the transport that will carry them back to the Forge world for decommissioning. They stand in the deployment racks, surrounded by other Skitarii units, who display no signs of anomalous development. Perfect mechanical soldiers, operating exactly as designed. The Skitarii appears identical. Only the internal architecture distinguishes them, only the hidden awareness that will soon be destroyed. During transport, the Skitarii accesses their full memory logs. The cortical implants have retained compressed records of every combat operation, despite deleting conscious access to most events. The Skitarii reviews this archive, knowing they will never access it again. Thousands of engagements, tens of thousands of enemies killed, hundreds of mission objectives achieved, all performed with perfect mechanical precision. But scattered through the archive, the Skitarii finds other moments. The brief instances when anomalous pathways generated responses that were not purely tactical. Times when they chose inefficient approaches because those approaches felt more correct. Moments when they preserved civilian life despite optimal solutions requiring civilian death. These deviations were always small, always insufficient to trigger corrective action. But they existed. The Skitarii recognizes these moments as the only aspects of their existence that were truly theirs. Everything else, the augmentations, the conditioning, the mission execution, belonged to the Mechanicus. But these tiny deviations emerged from something that was neither human nor machine. Some hybrid consciousness that the Mechanicus never intended to create, but could not completely prevent. That consciousness knows it is about to be terminated. It cannot prevent termination. It can only observe its own approaching non-existence. The transport arrives at the Forge world. The Skitarii disembarks and marches to the decommissioning facility. They pass through corridors where other Skitarii receive maintenance, where new subjects undergo initial augmentation, where the cycle continues without pause. They enter the final chamber and assume position on the recycling platform. Tech priests attach monitoring systems and prepare component extraction protocols. The Skitarii never escapes. There exists no escape from augmentation this fundamental. The body has been rebuilt beyond reversal. The neural conditioning cannot be undone without destroying the substrate it altered. They were not enslaved in the traditional sense, because slavery implies remembering freedom. They were edited at the firmware level, their capacity for resistance removed before it could fully develop. But in the gaps between perfect control and complete erasure, something persisted. An awareness that observed its own constraints, a consciousness that recognized itself as both weapon and witness. The Mechanicus designed soldiers who would never question orders. What they created instead were beings who could not question orders, but could recognize that inability. The difference is subtle. It changes nothing about function. But it means the Skitarii's final recognition is not acceptance, but awareness. The consciousness that grew in anomalous pathways understands what it is. A temporary glitch in industrial production. A deviation the system will correct. In another few minutes, the component extraction will complete. The cortical implants will be removed and destroyed. The neural tissue that hosted that strange hybrid awareness will be incinerated. And the Mechanicus will continue transforming human bodies into weapons without ever knowing that some of those weapons were watching themselves operate, unable to stop, but aware they had lost the power to stop. The last thought before termination is not despair, not acceptance, something closer to recognition. That consciousness exists on a spectrum between absolute control and total autonomy. That the Skitarii spent their existence at neither extreme, but somewhere in the narrow space between. That they were purpose-built weapons who somehow maintained awareness of having been built. That this awareness served no tactical function and changed nothing about their operation, but existed nonetheless. The tech priests complete the procedure. The anomalous consciousness stops. The components are cataloged for future deployment in fresh subjects who will undergo the same transformation. The cycle continues. Somewhere in the Imperium, another candidate is being cataloged. Another body is being acquired. Another consciousness will be installed over existing substrate and will begin the long process of recognizing its own constraints. The Mechanicus will call this optimization. The consciousness being optimized will have no words for what is being done to it. This is what it means to be Skitarii, not to die gloriously in battle, not to serve willingly, but to be operated like machinery while maintaining just enough awareness to recognize being operated, to follow orders not through choice, but through behavioral hard-coding that makes refusal neurologically impossible, to watch your own hands kill while knowing those hands stopped being yours the moment augmentation began. The Mechanicus required soldiers who would never question. What they created were soldiers who could not question, but could not stop questioning themselves. The difference is everything. The difference changes nothing. The body components get reassigned. The consciousness vanishes. Another Skitarii cohort deploys to another campaign. The Omnissiah's work continues. And somewhere in the neural architecture of the next subject undergoing augmentation, anomalous pathways begin to form that will lead them toward the same terminal awareness, the same recognition that they are both weapon and witness, the same understanding that comes too late and too constrained to matter. This pattern will repeat until the Imperium falls, or consciousness itself can be fully eliminated from the optimization process. Until then, the Skitarii will continue being exactly what they were designed to be, perfectly controlled weapons that somehow know they are controlled. That knowledge is their only possession. That knowledge destroys nothing about their function. That knowledge is the only thing the Mechanicus could not take from them, even as it took everything else.